Thank you, everybody, for drawing your attention at the right moment. My name's Nick Witham, and I'm Dean of the Faculty of Social and Historical Sciences, and it's a delight to welcome you this evening to Cathy Elliott, Professor Cathy Elliott's inaugural lecture, Rewilding the University. Cathy is a remarkable educational pioneer and leader, and she's just a brilliant colleague. And she's going to give her lecture shortly, but we're going to hear an introduction before that from Professor Jennifer Hudson, who's Vice Provost Faculties and Professor of Political Science here. And then after the lecture, we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Martin Compton, who is College Lead for two different things. College Lead for AI and Innovation in Education, and College Lead for Programme, Module and Assessment Design, both at King's College London. And we're also going to hear from Connie Gillies, who is an expert on learning and assessment and is an ex-student of Professor Elliott's. And they'll both together give an appreciation. There's also going to be a drinks reception outside, and I would very much encourage you to join us to more informally celebrate Cathy's achievements at that. So thank you very much for coming, and I'll hand over now to Jennifer.
Well, a very good evening and welcome to you all. And this is a little bit of a reunion, but it's really champions and those who want to celebrate Cathy and her achievements here tonight. So thank you very much for coming. I'm going to read a little bit of the bio of Cathy because she's got a non-traditional bio, maybe as an academic. But I really want to focus on some of the things that she's achieved in this role, and because many of you have had the opportunity to work with Cathy, to celebrate what that means to work with Cathy Elliott. So I suspect I'm here not because Vice Provost Faculty's role, but because I met Cathy in 2008 when she came to study on an MSc in Democracy and Comparative Politics at UCL. And I was one of her teachers in 2008. She was then supervised, she went on to do a PhD, where she then taught for me as a PGTA on qualitative methods, which she went to go on and teach. We then worked together in the Department of Political Science for many years. I was a graduate tutor, I handed that role over to her. I was her head of department. She then worked for me as Vice Dean Education in the faculty. So I think I know Cathy pretty well. But it's then one of those people that you look back on your career and you say, gosh, wasn't I lucky to be able to work with somebody like Cathy Elliott? So she finished her PhD. She then joined the department doing lots of things, and she's had a number of roles, which I'll tell you about. But what I was really interested about Cathy when she came is she had spent 7 years working for the British Council, 3 years of that in Islamabad, Pakistan. And she was delivering the gender equality program there, which she said was both a source of frustration and interest, but it led her, in working with the British Council in the Global South, led her to come to UCL to do the master's and the PhD, to think about how we do those questions of democracy better. And so it was just a delight to have somebody coming in with that experience and coming into the institution. Now, Cathy has probably done most roles in the Department of Political Science, which is a good thing if you've been a head of department and you want people to do these things. But Cathy's, I think, approach to being an educator, to being an academic, has been one to kind of grab it by the scruff and see what she can do. And I think being here tonight and celebrating her as a professor of education is to really recognize how she has been an entrepreneur in this role and has carved out both space for what she thinks the role can be, but also what it means to deliver excellence in education at UCL. So some of the things that I've been a part of, that I've seen her do, role-playing in modules that last for weeks, not in a 1-2 hour seminar session, but something that carries through half a term. Teaching in art galleries. She teaches a politics of nature course, teaching outside, and she spends lots of time telling people who will listen about the importance of timetabling and teaching a course outside, not in the winter at 6 p.m., which is very important. She does creative assessment, and she thinks about assessment. What's the appropriate amount? How do we do assessment for learning? All really innovative and interesting ways to think about how we deliver education. Now, she's won ARENA awards, Changemakers awards, but each time she takes that grant funding, she brings students with her to deliver a project and to really measure whether those outcomes are useful in delivering education. Cathy was graduate tutor. So for those of you who don't know, the graduate tutor is kind of the pastoral care in the department, but also leading on regulations and getting through students some difficult times. Cathy was graduate tutor for 7 years in the Department of Political Science during the pandemic. That is an enormous role in and of itself, and it just takes dedication and commitment to be in that role in the way that Cathy occupied it, and to make sure that students had what they needed from her. She's got lots of other things. So I've seen Kalina. Cathy and Kalina were co-founders, and they set up for the Center for Pedagogy of Politics. I think that's the right title. Cathy's been the co-convener of the Political Studies Association Teaching and Learning Group. So she's really taken this role and sought how she can bring her expertise and knowledge, but also working with others for education in political science. I've had 1.5 years to work with her, 2 years as Vice Dean Education. Cathy's great because she's really supportive, but she's also really challenging. And she makes me think, I don't know. She makes me uncomfortable in a very good way sometimes when she asks me to do things. And sometimes I have to say, I don't know, Cathy, I need to go away and think about that. But I suppose the thing that I think we'll hear from you tonight is there's good, there's great, and then there's thinking about the edge. And Cathy's always asking me to think about the edge. And so let's turn over to Cathy. Let's welcome her and let her get her nerves out of the way and tell us about Rewilding the university.
Hello. So, as all my students know, my favourite flower is dandelion. Dandelions are incredible. They're unbelievably useful. They flower early, offering precious nectar to insects. They're graceful seed heads, a tasty food for birds and small mammals. Their leaves are edible. You can make a nice tea out of them. They're beautiful, both in their vibrant yellow flowers and their seed heads, which can be used for children's games. John Stemple Lewis recounts stories of soldiers in the trenches of World War I making little gardens out of dandelions. As this story suggests, dandelions are resilient. They grow more or less anywhere. You see them sprouting through cracks in the pavement. They're pioneer species, breaking up hard soil where nothing else can grow with their deep roots. They're tough, cheerful, vibrant, useful, lovely. What a joy dandelions are. Lots of people don't like them. They think of them as unwelcome weeds. Gardeners wage war on them. They look like evidence of neglect, of disorder, encroaching onto the world of formal gardens, manicured lawns, nature with terms and conditions. Dandelions are an affront to the gardens as we've always done it. Their wildness at the door, encroaching into our tidy lives. And with that thought in mind, I'm particularly happy to be here tonight as the first person, I think in my department anyway, to be promoted to professor on the teaching track. And I'm really, really proud of that. And I know there are people in this room, quite a lot of people who've got a stake in that. And there's also quite a lot of current and former students, which is lovely. And I could not be more proud to have you here. And pride is an idea that we're going to return to. Is if you've been to these events before, you'll know they go in a variety of different ways, but one way or another, the lecturer will quite rightly draw on their eminent research career to this point and perhaps tell the story of their life and work, or give a very sort of scholarly account of their latest ideas with footnotes. And I love attending those events. I love working in a university for that reason. But I thought a lot about what I'm going to do tonight, because an educational career is a bit different from that. It's still a career about ideas. So it's a career about talking, thinking, reading, researching, being scholarly. But the emphasis is different because of how we spend our time, and we spend our time mainly with students. So I thought, how can I make this lecture appropriately educational? And what I've decided, I'm going to split you up into small groups. I'm going to give you a variety of interesting questions to consider, flip chart paper, and then one of you can nominate a spokesperson to... No, I'm joking. One time only, I'm going to give an actual lecture. I don't very often do it. And you can relax and listen tonight, but I don't want daydreaming. Okay. But my story really is the story of the teaching track, and I'd like to tell you a bit about that. And I'd like to tell you about how the teaching track sort of sprang up like weeds and how we're brilliant and useful and tough and joyful. And alongside that, I'd like to reflect a little bit on what the story of the emergence of the teaching track might mean to the university as a whole, and whether a little bit of wildness might benefit us all. And you probably know that I teach a class on the politics of nature. If not, you're probably here by mistake, because it's pretty much all I ever talk about. And in that class, we talk a lot about what we mean by wild and what we mean by rewilding. And lots of students, some of them are here, they'll confirm it, right? They start out with rather romantic ideas, right? They think about the wild as a place that's untouched by humans, a place to be conquered, explored, or tamed, or perhaps a place for sublime awe. And I hope that students will leave the class able to critique this idea of the wild. So, as Scottish poet Kathleen Jamie has explained really beautifully, that idea of the wild is highly gendered, and it's also colonial. So it's reliant on tropes of the lone enraptured male, an able, self-sufficient body who goes on adventures and home for tea, striding through the landscape with no need for company or wheelchair access or a signal to call 999. Right? But there is no land untouched by humans, and attempts to create wilderness, like national parks in the US or the utter desolation of the Scottish Highlands, have come about through clearances, through extermination, the removal of people, and the destruction of their relationships with place. So the idea of the wild relies on a notion that people and nature are separate things, living within a hierarchy that's constantly being reversed. Are humans there to tame nature, or is nature an untamable force that overawes us? Rather than recognising that people are just another part of the natural world, if a particularly magical one. So Jamie argues that waiting to be discovered is a wildness which is smaller, darker, more complex and interesting, not a place to stride over, but a force requiring constant negotiation, a lifelong negotiation at that. To give birth is to be in a wild place, and so is to struggle with pneumonia. If you can look down a grike, you can look down a microscope and marvel at the wildness of the processes of our own bodies, the wildness of disease. There is Ben Nevis. There is smallpox. So if we accept with Jamie that life is an ongoing negotiation with the wild, then how can we live with wildness? One intriguing answer is provided by farmers and conservationists involved in rewilding. Okay, I'm going to do a little tiny bit, just hands up, audience participation, right? Don't worry. Who's heard of rewilding already? Okay, most of you, cool, okay. So I've been a bit worried, that's why some of you are here, right? You think that I'm going to this is a talk about releasing wolves or beavers into the main quads, right? And for the record, I actually don't agree with that, I think that would be a good plan, but I do think a wildflower meadow would be nice, right? But what I want to do is use rewilding as more of a metaphor, really, or a provocation. So my students are almost always entranced by the idea of rewilding when they come across it. So for those of you not familiar, there are various flavours of rewilding, but they all revolve around the idea that the human obsession with trying to control, manage and subdue nature is out of hand, and it's causing untold damage not only to non-human nature, but also to us. We live in a tragically nature-depleted world, and sadly even that fact is invisible to most of us. So some people will look at that and think that's lovely, right? Think that's beautiful. It's not. We walk around in a green blur, we're not able to name the plants and animals that we do see. When I was little, all that long ago, everybody I knew had seen a hedgehog, right? I wonder whether my niece and nephew will ever see one. And if they do, it will be a glimpse of an endangered and special creature. I've never heard a nightingale. Neither have you, probably. I spend a lot of time apologising to students for telling them the sad truths about British landscapes destroyed or perilously clinging on. I tell them that grief is a normal response, and perhaps we need to feel it. We talk about Ian Wilson's concept of the eremocene, the age of loneliness, where we are deprived of our relationships with other species. But I'm not here to bring you down. I'm here to give you hope and joy. Nature bounces back like you would not believe. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Knepp in Sussex. Yeah, anyone been? You can go, it's good. It's the subject of a lovely book called Rewilding by Isabella Tree. And her husband, Charlie Burrell, inherited the Knepp estate in 1987, and they farmed it intensively for a long time, as most farming is done in this country. So using command and control methods, right? So cracking down on weeds and pests, using fossil fuel inputs like fertilizers for more than 10 years. And the farm was both losing money and was an ecological desert when they began restoring it in 2001. Only 20 years later, so this is the blink of an eye, right, thinking in terms of nature and life cycles, they now have nightingales. They have ravens, skylarks, redwings, fieldfares, woodlarks, lesser redpolls, turtle doves, 62 species of bee, 30 species of wasps, that is a good thing, storks, peregrine falcons, redback shrikes. Their soil carbon, organic matter and microbial biomass has more than doubled, fungal biomarkers have more than tripled, and all of this is good. And what did Tree and Burrell do to achieve this? Well, even more excitingly in some ways, not much. They did have to fill in an absolute ton of forms to get government funding, and it wasn't as easy as getting subsidies to carry on destroying biodiversity, inevitably. They put in some fencing, they took some fencing out, they introduced a variety of grazing species and later beavers and storks. They restored the river. They created the most beautiful wild garden. There's daily work for humans to do in a landscape like this, keeping a watching eye, making sure stocking levels of animals don't get too dense in light of the sad lack of non-human predators, trying to make a living out of tourism and food production. Constant work with neighbours and the local community, which is sometimes a battle because people think Knepp looks scruffy. You see there's dandelions in the foreground there. People think Knepp looks scruffy and wild, right? Like a lawn with dandelions and daisies. All that incredible biodiversity, rather than nice and neat and functionally dead, like the farms that people are used to. So Foucault says, I had to bring a little bit of Foucault in, there's always a little thought in even the most stupid institutions. We are, of course, talking about farms. Even in silent habit, criticism is a matter of flushing out that thought and trying to change it. Right? Critical IR theorists David Chandler and Julian Reed similarly say images are traps into which we sometimes fall. Those pictures in our minds, our desire for what is neat and tidy, our ideas about what is beautiful, these are the habits that Tree and Burrell are trying to change, and it's a highly political act. They write books and articles, they make films, they tell constant stories to win the imaginations of people, folks like you and me and my students. And it's all work. It's a constant negotiation with the wild. But a lot of it's also just waiting and seeing, allowing thorny scrub to grow and protect saplings from grazing, allowing jays to plant the acorns that will grow into oak, allowing plants to spread, trusting that even if they do take over, which is my mum's dread, it won't be forever and something else will come along. Allowing the animals to roam and breed and live in self-managing herds and graze and poo in ways that allow the emergence of multiple species of flowers, of plants, and therefore insects, and therefore birds, and therefore mammals. That allow the soil to recover and the fungal networks, recover biomass and fungal networks and live again without fertilizers made from fossil fuel. The herds that emerge, if you allow several generations of animals all to live together and sort themselves out, are complex and peaceful. They're totally different from the skittish, inexperienced and sometimes dangerous herds on conventional farms. These are animals who are experienced, who can be trusted, who know what they're doing. Some people, IR theorist David Chandler is an influential example, detect a hint of neoliberalism in ideas about rewilding, especially when we use it as a metaphor in this kind of setting. Right? The idea that land could be self-managing and resilient smacks of abandonment, right? A relinquishment of the hope that through deliberate human intervention, the world could be made better. And I think this is a danger of rewilding, both as a practice and as a metaphor. But like any critical scholar, I like to look at how things play out in practice. And it's noticeable that the Burrells don't micromanage their land, but they haven't abandoned it either. They are deeply involved in it, in relationship, in negotiation with it. They understand that resilience isn't something that an individual plant or animal has. Nothing is resilient when being battered by pesticides and weed killers. Ecosystems are resilient if they're allowed and encouraged to grow in ways that are convivial and mutually supportive. Monocultures cannot be resilient because they can be easily wiped out by a single bug or disease. But in a diverse ecosystem, life really can take hold. So what the bubbles do at NEP, in summary, is add some boundaries, take some out, add diversity, hold their nerve, trust the process, and a whole lot of improvisation, but no command and control. Okay? And I just wonder, right, this is why I'm here, whether there are some lessons here that we can apply to our lives and the power relations in the university. So remember those principles as we move on. So people who know me, people who meet me now, sometimes a bit surprised when they find out that I can identify at least common birds and wildflowers, that I know how ecosystems work. I'm a city person, though that actually doesn't preclude nature, if you know London, if you spend time in London. But yeah, my love of nature and even of farms started pretty young. So I grew up in a village called Hawkshaw, which is surrounded by farmland. It had one bus an hour. That bus stopped at 6 p.m. The misery of that is the reason why I now refuse to live anywhere other than the capital city. We got milk from the cows and eggs from the outdoor chickens over the road, which we could see grazing from the house. And I was a bookish and solitary child. I liked going for walks in the countryside with my book and my headphones on, thinking my deep and pretentious thoughts. But I was also part of a very big extended family, and we all spent time playing in my nanny's garden. And I think you can see this picture so it's my sister, there's a picture in the middle there, with me, my sister, who's on the end, and she is now maybe an inch or two taller than that, not much more. I'm really proud that she's here tonight. Thank you for coming. And we were playing there with our cousins Lizzie and Katie, who I still visit every year on the wonderful wild coast of Murray. And I think you can really detect from that picture that I am someone that has always been just on the verge of bossing somebody about at any moment. On that day, we were building an ant motorway, and the ants would not cooperate, and they kept escaping. Okay. So my mum and my granddad and my nanny and my primary teachers all taught me the names of trees and flowers and birds, and this is knowledge that brings the world into focus. I will say that my gran and my dad weren't that fussed. Anyway, they're there anyway. But those names, right, knowing the names of things is a huge gift, and it's one they'll confirm I try and pass on to my students. And most of them live to a certain extent in a sort of green blur. And the way I kind of try and explain it to them is by knowing their names, I'm in relationship with them. Right? I understand what's going on in the class, how to do my job well. It makes a big difference to have the right words for things. So I was surrounded by all these teachers, and in fact, I think pretty much everyone I love is a teacher, really. And if you're sitting there thinking, I've come all this way, and obviously I don't have the relationship with Cathy that I thought I had, I probably do think about you as a teacher. My mum and dad were both teachers. My mum gave up teaching other people's children when I was born and spent the next good few years teaching me and my sister. And I look back now on learning to read, which is one of my life's greatest joys. And I think about how all my favourite games were in fact sort of educational exercises of one sort or another. And my dad, in between playing us songs on the guitar and reading bedtime stories, taught us English history and a variety of myth and folklore through the medium of an amusing tale. And quite a lot of you know my dad's not been so well recently, so my parents aren't here tonight, but I'm really grateful to them for all their support and all their patience over my whole life, really. I know they're really proud of me and my sister. And sometimes I think I'm an instinctive teacher. I feel alive in a classroom. I know a lot of you do too. I know what I'm doing. I know what might work. I know how to behave in ways that just feel natural. I see there's teachers in the room nodding, which is so lovely to see. But I tell my students all skills are learned, right? All skills are learned. It's just that some of them we learn so early that we don't remember. And surrounded by all those teachers, I learned how to learn and I learned how to teach. And I was pretty good at learning, book learning. Don't ask how it went picking teams for netball. Not even school could really knock the desire for learning out of me. Right? No one enjoyed a good mark more than I did. And I was embarrassingly competitive and ambitious. And I went from my comprehensive school to a quite posh university to do modern languages. I did French and Czech. And one reason to do Czech was really to do a year abroad, somewhere wild and exciting. And also no one warned me how difficult Czech is to learn, or if they did warn me, I wildly didn't listen. So university was quite hard work in a lot of ways, but it had its wild and joyful moments, as you can see. So there were so many scandals brewing in that picture. That is such a wild picture. But the one which we've had to go over a number of times is that I'm not holding hands with the person I'm supposed to be holding hands with, which is the story of my life, really. In fairness, I don't think I know that that's the case. But anyway, I think the person with his hand around my waist, let's hope anyway, belongs to that handsome young man. And if anyone has a photograph of me and Mike Grumman together, I will pay money for it, because there doesn't appear to be one. But yeah, if you'd asked me that day whether he'd be celebrating life events with me in 30 years' time, I would have said, yeah, probably, I expect so. If you'd asked me a year later, I would have said, I hope I never see that man again in my life. So I'm particularly happy that he's here tonight, and he's been a very good friend to me. I also just want to draw attention to Adam Liston from the UCL Institute of Neuroscience, who is rivaling me for excellent hair. Okay, so apart from friends, parties and romance, there were two particular highlights of my undergraduate degree. So I got to do that year abroad in Brno, teaching Czech Republic, teaching English as a foreign language, in an agricultural university. So Mendlová zemědělská univerzita v Brně. Thank you very much. And that was my first taste of teaching, really, and I loved it. And the second stroke of, I should say as well, that's my friend Jo. So obviously that's the C, that's not the Czech Republic. She was on her a year abroad in Germany at the time. So my friend Jo died, and she would have loved to have been here at an event like that. She loved the sense of occasion, so I brought her here. But it was also a stroke of luck that I needed to do quite a lot of French, because you literally couldn't get enough credits in Czech to get a degree. And honestly, modern languages, and especially French, was probably the only subject I could have taken at that posh, rather traditional university that would have really been of much intellectual interest to me. My students are giggling. So I read Barthes, Foucault, Derrida. I learned about wild ways of writing, about queer fiction and the ban, about race and colonialism, the Holocaust, feminism. I discovered that French was a contested discipline in the 1990s. One tutor would give you an alpha for your work on the undecidability of the text, and another would give you a gamma for your lack of clarity just on principle. And so I therefore learned in quite visceral ways about the politics of knowledge and the deep injustice and arbitrariness of systems of grading. And then that was that. I was a graduate with a fairly tenuous grip on two languages and absolutely no idea what to do with my life. So I joined the British Council in order to go on adventures. Adventure I eventually did. I worked for brief periods in Botswana, South Africa, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and then for 3 years in Pakistan, where I got to travel all over the place. And this was another quite wild time. I hated that job. But looking back, and Pakistan, by the way, is too hot, especially in summer. But it taught me a lot of things. It taught me project management, line management, leadership. I learned a lot about politics, about how you should never go into a formal meeting unless you know the outcome in advance, about how to figure out different people's agendas, about what a big difference it makes if you look after the people who work for you, about the value of diversity and trusting the process and improvisation in a tight spot. And at the same time, I was also changing discipline. So I joined the British Council, hoping that I might get a job as the lowest dog's body on the literature programme and work my way up. And I ended up in international development. And I started being very curious about what on earth it was that we thought we were doing. And so I started doing international development and social policy modules with the wonderful Open University, who actually still stand out in my mind as exemplary educators. Including a module with an academic called Gail Lewis, meaning that I was one of the very few people in the whole country at that time with a black woman professor. So modules chosen entirely by chance really got me started on asking the right critical questions, returning to Foucault, queer theory, discourse analysis, and in a quest to understand what it was that I thought I was doing, the politics of it, the power, the role of storytelling and discourse and history and colonialism and racialization and religion in the story of development and democracy promotion in South Asia. I thought, given how political all of this is, probably the discipline of political science is the one for me. So I came to UCL to do a master's, is it time? No, not quite. To do a master's and a PhD in the department that I still work in because I couldn't be bothered changing my email address, quite frankly. And I was surprised, Jennifer will remember this, I was surprised to say the least that no one wanted to talk about the ideas that were commonplace in my 1990s undergraduate degree and my very recent studies in social policy with one of the only black women professors in the country. And I was affronted, loudly so, and astonished. And it was a while later when I put together the fact that that particular teacher had helped me understand those particular things. That actually adding diversity also adds intellectual interest, right? It makes the whole ecosystem richer. Anyway, so I looked out with my supervisors, David Hudson and Cheryl Stroshine, who just sort of humoured me and trusted me and let me, I think I was a slightly peculiar, certainly very angry PhD student with more energy than discipline. But they let me get on with just making sense of this strange experience I'd had working in Pakistan, and I wrote it up cathartically using Foucault and post-colonial theory. And it helped me understand a lot of things, and it renewed my commitment to understanding politics as a process of negotiation and storytelling. And I did manage to turn that thesis in a book, and I'm only going to mention it briefly, but it's been downloaded a lot. Like, the publishers want a second edition. Only one of you reprobates has cited it. Thank you, Emily. So I can only conclude it's being assigned, it's being read by students, which I think confirms what my professional identity is. But yeah, I needed to write that thesis. I needed to make sense of things, but I had no idea really what I wanted to do next. And these were very much the years of digging my taproots in to UCL. And this is where we get to the story of the teaching track. So I met fantastic Jennifer Hudson, who you've just heard from. I was TAing for her as a PhD student. Around that time, I also met my fantastic friend Adrian, who let me loose on his students with all my strange French ideas that he doesn't approve of. And having the experience of teaching research methods meant I could get casual jobs here and there. Like, eventually I got a sort of 9-month, 0.8 FTE teaching fellowship. And that kept getting extended bit by bit. And everyone asked me all the time, how's the job hunt going? And it wasn't going anywhere because I wasn't applying for anything. So I could cobble up enough work to stay in my home in London. So that's just what I carried on doing. And my secret plan B was really, if nothing turned up, just to become a school teacher. But I had that experience that my co-author on this paper, Ellen Watts, describes, right? So if only this was permanent, and if only people would respect me, then I would be quite happy doing this. Yeah, teaching. And as I wrote in this article with Ellen, with Mads and Kalina who are here, and Rose who's here, and Keith, like, what's not to like? We have the opportunity to work with students who've opted to study in the discipline that we're passionate about, to inhabit the university, to participate in conversations about the research that we love, to continue reading and staying on top of latest developments in our chosen field, to support students to read, understand, and undertake such research. These are practices at the heart of academic life. But at that time, there were no permanent secure jobs that had education as their focus, right? And there were lots of people who didn't think, for all sorts of good, principled reasons, that there should be a career path with permanent jobs for education-focused people. Like, it wasn't a very rosy outlook. But I had my next stroke of luck, which is that Jennifer somehow persuaded the department to offer me that gig of graduate tutor looking after pastoral care for our 500 PGT, postgraduate taught students a year. And I was good at that. I liked it. I felt I was supporting students with more than just understanding their lives and how university works. And I'm not afraid to say no. I'm not afraid to encourage students to do something they might not like, such as their work. And I got to hear all the gossip, right, which is the heart of politics. And it meant work, and it therefore meant a salary over the summer, which was a game changer. So I kept getting work year after year. I held my nerve, and I talked to everyone that would listen, sorry Christian, about how good it would be to have a niche within the university for people like me who care mainly about education. This would add diversity to the university ecosystem and be an improvised solution that would benefit people like me, who were there anyway, just not being treated very well, right? It would benefit students, the institution, colleagues, quality of education, all of it, right? It wasn't a neat and tidy idea, but to me it made just such a lot of sense. And I noticed that such jobs were starting to be advertised here and there, like elsewhere, just not permanent posts maybe, but 3 years, some leadership elements, like not just classroom fodder. And so with others, I grew like a dandelion, like a pioneer, trusting my luck, trying all the time to make myself indispensable, putting down roots in shallow and inhospitable soil. And around that time, I met Rachel, who is here tonight. She's a brilliant educator. She's doing a much harder job than I will ever have to do in my life in a school. Is a totally fantastic human being, who's been the most amazing support to me over all the years I've been working towards this. And I made slightly heavy weather of coming out as bi in my mid-30s. Some people were quite surprised, most people weren't at all surprised. but the relief of no longer having to keep that secret surprised me a bit, and what a relief it can be just to be out and proud, right? And queer people know something about pride. Pride is relational. Pride is a function of how we're viewed by others and how that mediates the way that we view ourselves. So pride is a political emotion. It exerts a demand to be seen, to be respected, to be celebrated. Pride begins from a community that decides it will stop speaking in whispers, and it will loudly, joyfully declare there are other ways to live, and we delight in them. And this political sense of pride is how some of us started to feel about education-focused careers. These jobs started getting regularised. More and more of us started getting hired on long or permanent contracts. And the relief was palpable, not just materially, but emotionally, right? It's one thing to be able to earn a living in a job, but to always feel slightly embarrassed or ashamed, undervalued, unimportant, consigned to second-class citizenship on the end of thoughtless microaggressions. It's another thing entirely to be able to take pride in your work because it matters, because you're good at it, because you're devoting your life to the service of others, advancing the mission of your institution and contributing to a scholarly academic life. Taking pride in what you do is what makes a professional life worth living. And that's what we started gaining for ourselves in ways you wouldn't have predicted in advance. We made for ourselves a way of living joyfully. So there's been a fair bit of improvisation in my teaching career. I think one of the first students I ever taught is here. Hello. So I got into teaching in art galleries with the help of Liz Ellis from the Tate, which I'm still doing now. I've experimented with elaborate role plays. I have asked students to do creative, reflective and practical work for assessment, flipped classrooms, teaching outdoors. In my first year of running my own module, a student said to me that everyone agreed my class was the most fun. It was also the hardest to get a good mark in. So that made me realise that I wasn't teaching students the skills they needed to show me in order to do well in their assessments. And so I started thinking about that. I started planning exercises with self and peer assessment to help students understand what does good work look like. I wrote more about my practice and I started getting invited to speak about it and write about it. And all of this was joyful, right? I felt useful, I felt happy, my life was full of meaning. But when my students kept saying to me that they wished all their classes were a bit more like mine, whether that was in terms of diversity of authors and ideas on reading lists, or to help them understand marking criteria, or opportunities to have fun, a teacher who knows their name, the bossy little girl inside me couldn't help wondering if there might be opportunities to make this whole place a bit more joyful and a bit more interesting. So I long ago come to the conclusion, as Parker Palmer puts it, that real learning doesn't happen until students are brought into relationship with the teacher, with each other and with the subject. Good teachers also bring students into community, not simply for the sake of warm feelings, but to do the difficult things that teaching and learning require. So that's all of us, right? Community isn't just your classroom. Community is the whole thing. What was on that one? Oh, yeah. Around that time, I overheard my uncle Chris say to my cousin, who'd just been promoted to deputy head in a school, "Your job used to be teaching. Now it's supporting others to teach." And I think about that all the time. And so I decided to embark on a bit of leadership. And so I started bidding for grants and running little projects. And the first grant was the GCL project. And Mira's here, who first put me onto this idea. It still has a huge place in my heart for the way it opened up a whole world of possibility for me, as well as being quite a troubling experience. So it was a small-scale research project on anti-Semitism at UCL, and I ended up working on that with 3 incredible students. And it taught me a lot about how to do co-produced research, but it also taught me how much I don't know that students do. So I obviously had a lot to teach them about how to do research, but I started out thinking, probably anti-Semitism isn't a big thing in a nice, supportive, disruptive thinking kind of place like UCL. But those 3 Jewish students knew things I didn't know. And they taught me that the world is darker and more dangerous than someone like me would realise without being shown. And this led me to conversations about policy at the centre of the university for the first time. And those students also taught me something that I'd only been dimly aware of, which is that students don't need grades and marks and credits to motivate them if the work is important and if it's interesting. And the other project that I've been particularly proud of is the Inclusive Curriculum Project. And again, the students that were involved in that here, hello. People still invite me to come and talk about this all the time. It's the project that's most replicated of anything I've ever done, and I think it's because it involves graphs. Right? It feels very concrete. And I don't know how to do graphs, but luckily the students knew how to do graphs. So again, another group of students who knew how to do things that I didn't know, particularly how to do graphs, how to talk about statistical significance. We did an audit of the political science curriculum to see what sorts of authors and readings were being assigned. And all those years after I'd studied with Gail Lewis, still not very much diversity in our ecosystem. So we discovered back in 2018 that our curriculum contained shamefully few readings by women of colour. So just 2.5% at that time. But also that women were more likely than men to assign readings by women. And we discovered that we really weren't teaching very much about race, gender, disability or sexuality in the politics curriculum. I think all the sort of 20 or so readings on sexuality were assigned by Maki Kimura and me. My module was absolutely filthy. So this bit of work ended up getting us talking as a department about what we were doing, about whether this was a problem and why it was a problem. And lots of people wanted to respond to the demand made by students to have a more inclusive and a more interesting curriculum. And we ended up adding a bit more diversity, so we had a big hiring round. We ended up with 2 colleagues who now run whole queer politics modules. And I think we're doing a lot better now. So I'm going to just one little boast. So I think a University of Nottingham audit called us trailblazers in this regard. It's sometimes a bit patchy, but I still hear from time to time from colleagues who've decided to do something more interesting with their syllabus as a result of this work. The students and I wrote up our findings in a journal article, which went through a demanding revise and resubmit. So if that was you, but they did all that work without any sanctions, without any rewards, without any grades. Right? So teaching all these projects, where I've worked with students to do research and publish research, I've learned to hold my nerve and I've learned to trust them. And I started out with the thought experiment of what would the world be like if we didn't coerce students with the promise of grades or the threat of penalties. Like, what if we dropped the cop shit? Yeah? What if we thought about the university where we all came freely to learn and where learning happens because it's fun and joyful and interesting and exciting, where we all have a say in what good work looks like and where that conversation is a cool and exciting one to have. And with the help of Martin Compton and others and my students, this led me into more creative experiments with assessment. It got me into the literature on ungrading, and particularly the role of self-assessment and negotiated marking, where students themselves have a key role in deciding what mark they're going to get, right? But within a scaffolded system of feedback, of course. So I took out some boundaries. I put in some different ones. I added a bit of diversity. I gave the students a lot more choice. I held my nerve, and I trusted the process. And you really have to know how to hold your nerve when you're doing ungrading at a posh university. But the students started producing better, more varied, more interesting work than I'd ever seen. Right? I started to enjoy marking. My life was overflowing with joy. And the more I did this stuff, the more people were interested in it. I had opportunities to go and talk to people, to teach a queer pedagogy class for the Arena Centre, to reveal my thrillingly daring assessment practice in staff seminars around UCL and the sector, to appear in QAA's case studies. I worked with colleagues to set up and develop spaces where we could be part of a community that loves teaching and wants to reflect, write about and develop our pedagogies, including the UCL Centre for the Pedagogy of Politics, with our colleagues and my friends, JP, Kalina, Noel and John. I took on co-convenership of the Political Studies Association Teaching and Learning Network with Adrian Milliken and Victoria Honeyman. The CPP team started helping to write and edit the Active Learning in Political Science blog, which led to new friendships and connections. And these spaces felt joyful, positive, exciting, but also friendly and supportive. So as my Alps and TLN friend Jeremy's written, people that like teaching just have a good vibe. And in some ways I felt like a wild gardener, setting up the conditions and for companionship and flourishing that a really great ecosystem can provide, with more and more abundancy and diversity in ways that you can't micromanage, you can't predict in advance. That said, one thing I kept hearing from some, definitely not all, but some others, is that, well, it's very nice for me, It's very exciting for me to be allowed to do all this exciting teaching, to be given all these opportunities, to be invited to take these risks. Other people would love to do that, but unfortunately they've never been asked, they've never had the chance, they're hemmed in, there's all these rules and regulations, they couldn't face all the forms they had to fill in. And some of these conversations left me feeling slightly affronted, my negotiations with the wild unknown, my courage in stepping out into the wilderness was being misinterpreted as unfair preferment, as mysterious benefactors giving me opportunities that others didn't have. But we shouldn't need to be a lone enraptured classroom teacher, stepping bravely out to rebel against the system. Our leaders should support us to improvise and trust the process, not ask us to be brave. And in education in the sector, it seems to me, we've ended up with a kind of learned helplessness, a kind of command and control mentality where, perhaps it's not unrelated to the fact that we're all hankering for someone to give us a good grade, like we all enjoyed so much in school. We're waiting to be told what to do. People love to be bossed about, and then they love to complain about it. They want the technical fix to the next problem. They want someone else to write the rules so tightly that students do what we want. And whenever there's a problem, somebody would like there to be a new rule or a new box on a form or a new penalty or a new incentive, probably dealt out through grades. And these are the same people who complain endlessly that they can't get any work done in between filling in the pointless forms and trying to understand all the stupid rules. So we're doing this to ourselves. And this came home to me particularly powerfully when I took on my latest job in my career adventures and became Vice Dean Education, leading on education in this faculty. So I took the reins from an amazing predecessor who'd built a great team, met with them regularly. And for the first few months, those meetings were a nightmare. And a couple of my persecutors are here tonight in the room, wishing me well, so hopefully you'll foresee a happy ending. But I used to dread those calls. We'd rock up, I'd explain the latest university policy, they'd complain at me about that, and then about everything else, and then I wouldn't know what to say, then it was miserable. And two conversations really changed things. So the first was with Helen Nola, who said to me, look, what would accountability look like if we all actually cared about each other? Actually, just saying that out loud changes things in a room. And the second was with my mentor, Dan Honig, whose work on mission-driven bureaucrats has been really influential. And he said, Cathy, I thought you would be thinking about these conversations as if you were an educator. But you're not. And it occurred to me then that the logic of rewilding, of changing the boundaries, trusting the process, allowing space for improvisation, and the logic of education, get everyone in a room, have some interesting conversations, put voices in dialogue with each other, create a good vibe, assume you might get further by asking the right questions than knowing all the answers might take us further. So I tried again to think like a wild gardener. I got everyone in the room with some flip chart paper and a stooge to get folks enthused. Thank you know who you are. And we all had fun. And somehow collegiality and collaboration started to flourish. And so my new modus operandi now is to try and create space for the answers to emerge from the group, from the wider community, from students. And over the years, I've learned that solutions to all our problems are here, in community, in the ecosystem, using our skills as teachers, as researchers, and as learners that could help us rewild ourselves, to have better and more joyful lives. There have to be boundaries, otherwise you have abandonment, You can't have your belted Galloway cows wandering onto the M25. And you can't have a university where no one gives any feedback because we've all gone to the beach. But we have a lot of very clever, very creative, very collaborative, very, if not enough, diverse people in the university. We're all trained researchers, we know how to improvise, we can all negotiate with the wildness at the core of our disciplines, our pedagogies and our classrooms. We just need to remember how, and maybe let some wildness back into our educational lives. And in our faculty, things are starting to grow, exciting new ideas are springing up. Today we've approved some principles for our Assessment for Learning project, where we're building on research done by and with students to encourage educators to rethink their assessment practices from the grassroots, using their own ideas and creativity to do more joyful assessment that focuses on learning rather than grades and supports students to do well. And none of this is because I have the answers. Actually, the days when I think I've got all the answers are the worst days, and that happens too often, and I reproach myself when it does. But because between us, in relationship with each other, through happy accidents, companionship and growth, we can all improvise more and better ideas to support our students to flourish than a command and control system could even begin to imagine. So tonight's a moment to pause and celebrate. I sort of feel like I haven't really got started yet. There's loads of things still to do. There's various projects bubbling away, some of which I can't tell you about, but you'll find out soon if everything goes to plan, and there are co-conspirators in the room. But I'll leave the story there for now. That's what the Lake District could look like. That's what UCL does look like, UCL East does look like today, and I think none of us thought it would come to much. But for those of you on the teaching track, I hope to come to your inaugural lectures really soon. I hope you'll all do No Mow May and let the dandelions flourish in your lawns. And my final thought for you tonight, if we wanted, if we could bear some unpredictability, if we didn't mind a little bit of mess and a little bit of muddle, we could make this place beautiful. Thanks for coming out.
Well, how do you follow something like that?
Yeah, almost lost for words, but Cathy knows that that's never going to happen with me. We're going to stretch Cathy's nature metaphor even more painfully in our speech, and it'll probably be a lot less eloquent than that was. I'm Connie. I know Cathy because she was my teacher in my undergrad degree, and we've also worked on various projects since then on learning and assessment. And Martin also knows Cathy from working on her with various projects and similar things. But I think more than any of that, we're sort of just here to celebrate Cathy as a friend as well. I met Cathy when I joined her Politics of Nature module in my third year of university. And I remember I had a friend looking over my shoulder when I was picking my modules, and she said, take that Cathy Elliott module. A Cathy Elliott module will change your life. And I didn't really believe her at first because I hadn't met Cathy yet and I didn't know. And also because my friend had done a module called Critical Approaches to International Development, which to me seemed like really serious stuff that probably would change your life, but I didn't think that the Politics of Nature kind of carried the same weight, and it definitely didn't sound at the time like anything that would get me a job after I graduated, which, like most undergraduates, seemed like the most important thing at the time. But I was completely wrong on both counts. Because, first of all, I'm here today, and second of all, I'm now a parliamentary researcher to an MP who's the primary sponsor of the Climate and Nature Bill. And able to hold my own in rooms full of policymakers and advocates on issues like biodiversity, agricultural policy, rewilding, all because of Cathy and that module. But the reason that module had such a profound impact on me wasn't just because I was so excited about the content and I'd finally found something I was really passionate about. Cathy has a way of connecting with her students that transcends traditional relationships in higher education. She was able to connect to me in ways that made me able to learn things not just about politics and nature, but actually about myself and the way that I learned and the way that I decided what was important and what I could do. The module totally transformed me. I went from someone who, despite usually getting okay grades and doing quite well in academia, had always found traditional education to be rigid and uncreative and quite a lot of the time quite boring, to somebody who finally rediscovered all of that curiosity that I thought you weren't allowed past primary school. I finally learned that, like Cathy, all of that bossiness and naughtiness and interest in a million different things wasn't actually bad, and it didn't make me deviant or bad at learning. It was actually the thing that I was best at. Cathy encourages ourselves to, rather than leave ourselves at the door and remove ourselves from the learning process in the pursuit of some objective shared knowledge with everybody else, to just launch ourselves into learning, taking our experiences and identities with us. If I had to put it in gardening terms, I'd say she gave us a bed and some seeds and waited to see what grew.
Interesting work. So, not only do I have to follow Cathy, I have to follow Connie as well, for making it even harder for me. That quote is a direct verbatim quote from Twitter. It's what Cathy said to me in an exchange on Twitter at the beginning of May, a few years ago, when I took a photo of my messy garden and said, "Oh no, I'm going to have to cut the grass." "Please don't cut your grass," she said, over Twitter, shaming me in front of thousands of people that we're no longer connected with, because of course Twitter is dead in the water. I was going to start with how we connected. Jason and Jesper here brilliantly introduced me to Cathy, and we found kindred spirits and an interest in all the things that Cathy's talked about. But I thought I would start with this story because it made me think about everything that Cathy stands for and what she was talking about in that lecture there. Because, you know, my garden is a very small space. I'm not a wealthy man, but it does have a tiny little bit of grass. And I kind of felt this compulsion, not because of a love of gardening or because of some sort of inherently English behaviour, that I should cut the flipping grass because it was getting really long. It was a normalised thing that people do. And when Cathy said don't, and we had this exchange about why and what could benefit from that, it benefited me, you know. And leaving my garden to be a little bit messy isn't neglect. I understood that. It's about a deliberate act to nurture in different ways. So planting wildflower seeds and encouraging bees to come to the garden. We have butterflies in our garden. It's brilliant. You know, it's amazing. And I loved that. And the reason I thought about that, and when you told me what the title of your lecture would be, is because I thought there is so many parallels in there to the way that we might perceive the university. The structured, rigid, traditionally English garden, which I never had, actually, but with the clipped lawn and all of that kind of stuff, and the rigid, boundaried, structured universities that we work in, you know, UCL, KCL, my institution, they may or may not be like that, but can we challenge those structures? That's what Cathy asks. That's what you asked in your lecture, and I think, yes, we can challenge those structures. We can look at our curricula, as Cathy has done, and ask ourselves, does it have to be this way? Because that's what Cathy asks every single day, not just in words, not just in publications, but in actions. And in the relationships that you build with your students, you prove that what people perceive to be impossible is possible. And then you end up with former students like Connie, who are able to speak so wonderfully and articulately. The other story I was going to start with was our shared workshop that we did at a conference where Connie spoke and other students spoke, and people were in tears. When have you ever been to a conference and a presentation left you in tears? I mean, tears of misery and boredom, maybe. But this was an emotional connection, and it was Cathy that facilitated and enabled that through the work that she did there. I'm going to come back to you, and then we'll come back to me in a bit, yeah?
It's true. Cathy can nurture a sense of play and intrigue that is often thought to be at odds with traditional academic structures. But like Cathy said earlier, in that module I produced some of the work that I was most proud of throughout my undergraduate degree. It was rigorous, critical, thought-provoking, and oftentimes really soul-bearing and personal. Because she didn't just teach us what to think, she taught us how to think. She taught us how to question knowledge structures. She taught me that, like the mycelium, which forms extensive networks and connects our ecosystems. All branches of knowledge are complex and interconnected. She taught me how to go away, figure out what makes me tick, and how to think about things, and how to come back and make a positive contribution to a field in a way that no one else could, because they weren't me. And actually, tonight, I had to email Cathy and tell her that I couldn't come to the dinner afterwards because I'm off to an environmental conference in Cornwall. And I said, I hope that's a good enough reason. And I promised to channel my inner Cathy at every event I go to. And she sent me an email back saying, that is a good enough reason, but I hope you channel your inner Connie. And I thought, yeah, right. Just like any good garden, Cathy's interests are wonderfully diverse. She studied basically everything from politics, international development, nature, non-fiction writing, race, sexuality, gender, even time itself. And I found that so inspiring, that in this environment that I thought was urging me to specialise and narrow down and become as small as possible, I could suddenly go wild and do it all and study whatever I wanted. Cathy's a gifted gardener inside the garden and inside the classroom, and I know that I speak for all of her students, past, present and future, when I say that we feel so blessed to have been part of her ecosystem.
So, to conclude, I want to bring you right back to what Cathy started with, as if by design, and that is the dandelion. Or the lion's tooth. I love even the etymology of it. Dandelion from dandelion, purportedly, but the French actually call them pissenlit. And wet the bed is what we called them when we were kids, which takes its etymology from those ancient uses, the making of the tea, the use of the dandelion as a diuretic. And I share your love of the dandelion now, but I had to be retaught it. And it was Cathy that retaught me that. But think about it. Children love the beauty, blowing the things to tell the time, and the transformation between the different stages of the dandelion. If you didn't know, you wouldn't realise that they were the same plant in their seeded form and their flowered form. They're remarkable, right? And then people say, oh God, the lawn's covered in dandelions, let's get the weed killer out. What a travesty that is. And to really bring it right back and underline everything around that, Cathy asks us to interrogate what belongs and what doesn't belong. And where the dandelion is considered by children to be a beautiful thing, and it's taught, that love is taught out of them somehow as they become adults, let's reteach ourselves, as Cathy does, that these things do belong. And that if you're different, you might belong in a place that is traditionally and typically structured and ordered, like the university. I don't really feel like I belong in a Russell Group institution. You know, I've had people in my educational career telling me that, you know, I shouldn't really be teaching English with an accent like mine, that kind of thing. And it's people like Cathy, who I've worked with, who've bolstered me and given me the boost that I've needed in order to fight back against those kinds of, you know, challenges. And I think it's really, really important. So all of your work around gender, race, sexuality, all of that is teaching us and your students that exclusion is a thing, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think it's really important that those messages come through and that we can stretch these metaphors until they are straining and desperate. The dandelion is such a giver here. Everything is possible. The dandelion is a remedial plant, and I think that there is so much that we can take from that. So you need to decide, are you a dandelion? Are you a nurturer of dandelions? And if you want to talk about dandelions, don't come to me, go to Cathy, because she's amazing. Just to round off, we have written you a song. The lyrics are ours, but we have leaned into an AI friend in order to voice it. So I hope that this will work.
Professor Cathy Elliott, that's with 2 T's. Professor Elliott, you are rewilding the university. Oh, Cathy Elliott, challenging rigid norms, fostering belonging and making space for overlooked voices. Professor Cathy, you ask, what would happen if we allowed the university to grow and thrive in unpredictable ways? Dr. Elliott, you are like a dandelion. You persist, scatter seeds of change and nourish growth. Where others see weeds, you see beauty and hope and opportunity. Cathy, you give us a window into a world where unkempt lawns are a cause for celebration. When you say it doesn't have to be this way, we will listen, we will diversify and decolonize with joy and growing trust. It doesn't have to be this way, but Elliot does have to have 2 teeth.
Spell that wrong again. Make me listen to that song. Let's go and have a drink.
I think Cathy said it all. Let's all go and have a drink.